Long ago, I've made a list of the best and worst villains I've seen in most medias, and it's deleted because of reasons I don't want to get into, but now I'm remaking it. And this time, I'm going to make sure to include villains that I actually don't like. Villains that I really hate due to them lacking personality, motivation, the fact that they barely do anything throughout the game, a boring personality, uninteresting designs, and pitiful boss fights. If any of these villains fall into that criteria, guaranteed I'll be ranting about them in all of these criterias, because these are the actual villains that I have experienced and genuinely hated for the reasons that should be justified. So without further ado, let's get started with the list. Just to clarify, some of the villains that I will be ranting about will make an reappearance and others won't, and most of them, in fact all of them, are not going to be from movie media since I couldn't find one, and ones that I did find kind of pale in comparison to some of these ones. Number 10 still remained as the same as I've ranted about him before, that being Simcotch from Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. For one thing, the older Call of Duty games did a much better job with their villains. Very well written, have appearances throughout the entire game, and overall, they are the best the series has to offer. But when it came to the newer games, their villains just got really weak. And considering this is the farthest of the series I played, Koch takes the cake for being one of the most empty and uninteresting antagonists I've ever seen. He isn't really that interesting or threatening. He's the admiral of his own ship, the Olympus Mons, and serves as part of the SDF. But that's pretty much all there is. Mike Man has barely any screen time throughout the entire game. He is even the main leader of his own faction. He's just the admiral of his main ship. And whenever he does stuff in the game, sure, it may seem interesting to see him there, but it doesn't even matter that much since our heroes get away from the situation all okay. Considering this game had very good roster of characters, the villain just sticks out like a sore thumb amongst the cast for being so bland and uninteresting, only up until the end of the game where he actually does something. But even then, it barely mattered. Even his death was lame. It's one of the lamest villain deaths I've ever seen in the series. And it even proves a point further of why they shouldn't even add him, because after you beat him, you still have one more mission to go through. So overall, Koch just sucks. He's a waste of nothingness. And a shame the voice actor put some effort into the character, but I kinda wish the developers actually put some effort into the character as well. You know. Well, actually, I do have a movie antagonist that I actually hate, and one that I've wished I ranted about on the old list. Because this villain was unbearable, and a total assassination of the character himself. So we all know about the history of Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin, all that jazz, his annoying ice puns voiced by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, they turned him into a joke. But he wouldn't be my first pick of the worst villain, because, yeah, there is a couple things that changed completely. And besides, if I wanted to pick a villain that was so irritating, say hello to Two-Face from Batman Forever. I hate him even more than Mr. Freeze. For one thing, I can't take him seriously. Look at half of his face. I'm sorry, but the pink just doesn't do it for me. Sure, it fits the environment of the frickin' movie, but overall, it just doesn't really work. Second off, it never was explained why Two-Face was like this. Sure, you may look that up in a wiki and see that in other later movies, but here in this movie, this is how they introduce him off. Second off, you know that Two-Face himself is a charismatic, intimidating and threatening character who's always calm but goes outrageous during certain moments? Here in this movie, he's made to look like an unfunny joke. For one thing, this guy behaves like he's the Joker for some reason. let's take the personality and the gimmick of Joker, slap it onto Two-Face, and call it there. When in reality, it doesn't work. There are so many scenes that just make me annoyed, cringe, and just be like, this is Two-Face? Trying to be funny, but in reality, he's trying too damn hard and just making me cringe and just want to look away at the TV because of all these ridiculous moments. It doesn't fit the character. I don't know why they made him this way. Same with the Riddler, although he only gets a slight bit of a pass because he actually does stuff in the movie and was a bit annoying but didn't really cringe me out. And that's where Two-Face comes in to ruin his plan. Riddler was nearly about to reveal the identity of Batman, but he comes in because he's an impatient little shit. I just can't stand Two-Face. He is so irritating. I don't know if that was the writers or the way the person did the character, because it just doesn't work. This is not Two-Face in the slightest. Even his death sucked. He falls. Oh wow, he just straight up dies. How pitiful. Yeah, as much as we can say mixed bag about the older movies, the way they handled the villains was just so unnecessary. Guys, you are not the Joker. Quit trying to act like him. Considering a franchise like Pac-Man, it's kinda odd to see none of the villains get talked about, because there are some cool ones, but most of them end up being really uninteresting and unmemorable. And out of all of them, the one I experienced the most from my recent playthrough has to be Irwin from Pac-Man World 3. First off, his design. You expect me to take an alien little midget hobgoblin threatening? He doesn't even look that interesting of a character. So, and even for Pac-Man standards, this guy doesn't even fit. What's his whole deal? He has built the siphon in machine to suck up the energy for the spectral realm so he can turn all of Pac-Man and the ghost realm into destruction and a cold empty winter for years on end for his own gain. He's another one of those megalomaniac villains who just wants to destroy the world because cheese. Yeah, it doesn't get really explained that well, considering that he's the reason the spectral monsters are roaming around and Pac-Man is brought here by Orson. And furthermore, this guy is downright pathetic. So much so that even the main character Pac-Man doesn't even take him seriously. Whenever Irwin talks throughout the freaking game, Pac-Man either mocks him, makes fun of him, or doesn't even bother to say anything at all. And I don't blame him. You expect me to take a little midget joke of a villain seriously.
You're doomed. You're out. You're lunch. You're toast. Because I'm saving the meat of the mocking for when you're begging me for mercy.
I'm sorry, Pac-Man can't talk to the moronic would-be evil mastermind right now. Please leave a message after the beep. Beep!
Pac-Man!
What the hell were they thinking? Do they think this was gonna be a good way to go out with a villain? And then there's his boss fights. There are 2 in total, and by the way, they're the only boss fights in the entire game. His first fight is very interesting and forgettable, and his final fight, serving as the final boss, is very boring and uninspiring. So, it just didn't really make much sense to me, so much so that even his henchmen, who I'm not even gonna bother to talk about, offered nothing to the game. Seriously, it's no wonder why Pac-Man World 3 is the weakest game in the trilogy, because this guy is basically the whole reason why. When it comes to the true main antagonists of the Sly Cooper series, they are seen as some of the better ones. Clockwork and Dr. M come into very examples. Neela is fine, I guess. She could have been worked out a bit better. And the worst of the bunch is Cirilla Paradox. Where do I even begin with this guy? He is one of the most generic villains in the Sly Cooper series. For starters, he has his own family line. For some reason, why should we even care? And what basically happened is his father was planning to steal a massive diamond, but was beaten to the punch by Sly's father, tossed into prison. Because the Paradox had no experience or skills learning about the master of being a thief, he always ends up getting caught to prison. So to make that all up, he acts like a jewelry businessman to try to sell off stuff. And his whole shtick is that he goes after Sly Cooper and his ancestors to steal the canes to destroy their legacy because of what happened to his father. Only for him to change it around and be like that he stole all the canes so that he can prove to himself that he's the greatest thief of all time by stealing from a master thief himself. Only to be proven that he's an idiot. He literally exposed out his whole operation, targeting Sly's ancestors despite having no beef or grudges, and all because of his inflated ego. And besides, he didn't even steal the canes. He paid off his friends to do all the real work while he just sat in the back doing nothing but betraying them and just leaving them in the dust. So, what? I don't even get it, because this guy stinks. There's nothing interesting or exciting about him. He's just bland and uninteresting. And if only his boss fight could have been at least the only redeemable quality. But no, his boss fight is nothing but QTEs, which is one of the lamest things to do for a final boss. And even the death felt unsatisfying. He just tricked Sly. I don't know why Sly would help him up, and then only to be tossed off to prison because apparently he survived the fall into an ocean. Overall, Red Paradox stinks. No wonder why he's a skunk after all, because there's nothing even good about him in the slightest. He's just a smelly, rotten, stinky skunk who is very generic. So get him out of my face. Another villain that I also add in as a replacement during my old video, I replaced Imperator X from Sonic Chronicles off the old list for many reasons. Yes, he does suck. He's generic. His boss fight is one of the worst fights in the series. But if I actually experienced Sonic Chronicles, not like I'm ever going to, then I would probably have a bit more to talk about with this lame and generic character. And besides, I found a character that is nearly similar to X in certain ways. That being the Crawler from Fable 3. Okay, first off, his name. The Crawler. Seriously? Out of all the names you guys can come up with, this is the best you can come up with. The Crawler. And we make fun of Lyric's name being bad in Sonic Boom? Yeah, no thanks. Second off, his design is pretty generic. He just looks like a bootleg of Scarecrow from Batman. And third off, here are some of the similarities he has with Imperator X. He barely has any screen time throughout the game. It's only until you and Walter get shipwrecked on some random island, and then the Crawler decides to attack you, mostly Walter, to try to possess him and fill him with darkness, but it didn't work, because we free him out. And after we escape out of his caves, he's never seen again until the end of the game for the final battle, further proving why should they even add this villain. It also doesn't make any sense why they add this darkness entity enemy, which is just another generic trope, seriously. Considering the whole game's plot was focused around you trying to overthrow your evil brother, but in the end it didn't even matter because once you confront Logan, he just gives up like a little bitch. No boss fight, nothing. He just gives up, and the way they could expand out the game's length even further is by tossing the Crawler in as a desperate attempt. When in reality it doesn't even work, further proving why Fable 3's plot is so uninteresting. And speaking of boss fight, you do fight the Crawler in the form of possessing Walter. And while the fight is pretty decent, more than I can say about Fable 2's final boss, it still really isn't him. You aren't even fighting him entirely. And after you beat Walter, he just dies? No, literally, he just dies. Once the cutscene starts rolling, Walter is back to his normal self in a dying state. So even the crawler himself doesn't get a satisfying death. He just disappears, further proving why. There was literally no point of adding this antagonist in if they were going to do next to nothing but make him another generic darkness entity villain that just basically does and adds nothing to the game but just extending out the game's length. It's no surprise why Fable died entirely. This next villain is one of the most nothing villains I have ever seen in any media. And why do I say that? Because I will bring that up in a bit. And this antagonist is the Harbinger. No, not her. Him. The Harbinger from Dungeon Defenders 2. He is nothing. You wanna know why I bring that up? We know nothing about him! He's so full of nothing that there isn't even a wiki about the character or his backstory at all. Just his boss fight. How much more of nothing can you do when making a villain? Furthermore, what's his appearances? Well, you could say he appears in the first game's DLC as a mysterious hooded figure, but even then, I refuse to believe that that's actually him, because why would he go out of his way to warn the heroes about the lost interior shards that are making monsters more stronger and powerful and are the main gateway to crystalline dimension? Second off, what even is his motivation and goal? Because for some reason, in Dungeon Defenders 2 during the introduction of his boss fight, it was shown that he was there when the heroes were fighting the old one. But in the game that I've been playing nowadays, the cutscene is not there. So, what's that all about? Furthermore, he went to attack the castle in the sequel, take a crystal, and plans to use it for world destruction, I guess. I don't know, because it barely explains anything. And even then, his motivation is very generic as well, because it's not one of those typical villains that want to destroy the world kind of thing, with no interesting cohesive whatsoever. And speaking of boss fight from earlier, his fight is bad. The music is the only good part about the fight, because the fight itself is just an annoying hassle to deal with. And after he's defeated, he just runs away like a little bitch. And then, to further prove more of his nothingness, he only shows up until the Curse of Dreadbone's campaign, where you face off against Captain Dreadbones as a standard enemy instead of a boss. He comes to pick up the captain and just runs. That's basically it. That's the whole story. What, were you expecting more? Were you really expecting more? Because they gave up with the story. There is no story. There is no plot. There is no nothing. Further proving why this sequel is a disappointment. They basically did nothing with the story, but gave us a generic villain that does and adds nothing but be an annoyance, and just, I don't even know. For someone who's been a huge fan and played the first game since childhood and loved it close to his heart, the sequel disappointed me. The cliffhanger for the DLC was perfect. It showed that there could have been potential, but the devs did next to nothing with this game's story because they were mostly focused on the multiplayer stuff, further proving why this villain is nothing, just like this entire game. Shame on you. Next villain I'm going to rant about mostly has to do with the fault of how the writers written this character, because he is by far the biggest wasted potential of a villain I have ever seen in the entire series. Many people say 343 Guilty Spark from Halo is the worst antagonist, and frankly, I kind of don't really see that, since he's mostly evil for the sake of it, and besides, that was his whole role in the game anyway, so I give him a pass. But Atriox from Halo Wars 2 and Infinite. He is by far the most wasted villain I have ever seen in the entire series. Like, the only positive things about him is literally his design, his intimidation, his introduction, how he bodied 3 Spartans, not even the Master Chief himself could even top him, and his backstory as well. The deal with Atriox is that he served alongside the Covenant but got tired of their fake lies and beliefs that he turned against them, and even everyone else followed behind him. So he formed his own army called the Banished, with hired mercenaries and criminals to side on with him in his journey. So, interesting backstory, and it's pretty creative how they managed to make a character rise an entire army. But then the negatives start to stick their real ugly head. For one thing, throughout Halo Wars 2, he's barely doing anything throughout the game. Even when he does, it's just nothing but a pitiful way of him saying our characters to leave the planet so that way he doesn't go after us. But you really think our characters are gonna buy that? Nope. And after his whole army was beaten during the final mission, he just runs away like a little bitch. He couldn't even bother to get his hands dirty. No, he just sat in the back, twiddling his thumbs, did nothing, and now he's just gonna run all because he lost. Pitiful. And then there's Halo Infinite, where he makes his introduction in the start of the game, and the first thing he does to the Master Chief? Yeet him into space. Why doesn't he kill him? No freaking clue! What is it with villains having the heroes in their hands, and yet they don't even bother to kill them? You're not even gonna get rid of the problem beforehand, so that way it doesn't bite you in the back? No, that's why most villains fail. They should get rid of the problem beforehand. But, of course, Atriox makes a stupid move, and apparently throughout the game, everyone mentions that he dies. How did he die? No freaking clue. Spoiler alert, but it was showcased in the true ending that he's actually alive. Did he fake his death or something? Why did he abandon his troops? Why did he leave Eshram in charge of his army? No freaking clue. We never get clear answers because he's never seen throughout the entire game. All for a cliffhanger that basically doesn't matter because we aren't getting another Halo game to even conclude this freaking cliffhanger entirely, let alone continue the plot line. Because I would have liked this character more if they made him actually do stuff, but they made him do nothing but run away, doesn't kill his opponent, and just does nothing throughout the games. And that's the fault of the writers because I wanted to like this character. But, sadly, he sucks. The way they did him just makes me hate him. When it came to the Ratchet & Clank series and my investment into the series as a whole, the early game's villains are pretty well good, well written, very menacing, intimidating, and overall, one of them is the best in the series. But that being said, some of the later villains got mixed quality. Some are good, others just kinda there. But out of all of them, the worst has to go to Stuart Zero, the main villain in Full Frontal Assault. What? First off, you expect me to take a scrawny little nerd threatening or intimidating in the slightest? How do you expect me to take someone like him seriously? And for a bit of context for those who don't know, which I wouldn't blame you, Stuart Zero's only appearance in the series is Ratchet & Clank 2 Going Commando. We just exist as a side character on the planet Tudano, and you have to give him a Captain Quark action figure just for an optional little object. That's it. That's basically his only appearance in the entire series, and Insomniac thought it was a good idea to bring him back as the main villain out of all people. And what's his whole shtick of why he's here?
I was in a different place back then. All I wanted to do was be just like you. Then I watched as you were involved in scandal after scandal. And every time the galaxy just forgave you! You're nothing but one big epic fail! And this time, you're going to pay. Colon, close parentheses, I'm out.
Yeah, that's his whole motivation. Despite being the biggest fanboy to Quark, he just hates him. Why should I even really care? He's another one of those characters that also is annoying to listen to and acts like he's some cool hip kid, which just comes off as annoying and irritating. And the best he could do was disguise himself as a plumber so he can take control of the ship, play the troll music, and just annoy us, and then does nothing throughout the entire game.
Oh, LOL.
According, close parentheses. I'm out. Oh, and BT Dubs, I hacked your ship. Enjoy the carnage.
So, he could have had the opportunity, but he just did next to nothing but be an annoyance. He wasn't even worth the time or hassle to even go through, let alone to play through this game. And even his boss fight is a joke as well. I ranted about in the worst Ratchet & Clank bosses list. He is one of the worst final bosses I faced in the series. In his fight, he just basically does nothing but shoot at you, and just does nothing. Even the music sucks. And Zero doesn't even go out in an awesome way. He goes out in the most pitiful way possible. Seriously, I'd rather face off with Tachyon than this joke. There is nothing positive I can say about this worthless character. This was the series' 10th anniversary game, and yet they just end the game with nothing but a joke. And sadly, not even a funny one. Pitiful Insomniac. This number 2 villain just pissed me off so freaking much. So much so that I would have been so happy to slap him into number 1. And that being Ukon from Gears Tactics. I've ranted about another villain from this series, but that was until I played Gears Tactics, and this wrinkled old man is downright pitiful. He is the Locust scientist and one of the head leaders of the entire Locust Council. So why do I hate him in this game in particular? It's the way they did him. His introduction just comes off as a basically roll your eyes moment, because that's how I felt. It was pitiful. But then, this next cutscene that I witnessed right here pissed me off so much. First off, look at this cutscene. Look at this! What do you call this? Okay, let me clear up some things. He is casually walking around the street like some wrinkled old man with 2 Locust drones. The Locust drones are the weakest units in the entire Locust army. The cannon fodder. This guy, who is the most important character to the army, is walking around casually with 2 cannon fathers and gets beaten easily by a trap. What the hell were they thinking? What was he thinking? No Theron guards? You think with him being out of commission, that would be a huge detriment. But of course, Sid Redburns, being the intelligent, screwed up the trap, and Ukon manages to get away and regrow his arm. Not only that, he injects his soldiers with emotion. The emotion is the main hazard to the Locust army and was the reason why they were driven out of their homes and attacked our planet. And because it was turning all their troops to Lambit, making them into horrifying monsters, you're telling me this guy is injecting this stuff into his troops and they are perfectly fine? Why isn't he helping his frickin' kind? What has he been doing? Furthermore, he's barely done anything throughout the game, he has very little screen time, and only is seen after that embarrassing cutscene until the final fight. And speaking of that fight, it is horrendously bad. Imagine Mega Dragon Bowser, but done worse. His attacks are easy to avoid, but the fact that the enemies are constantly respawning throughout the entire fight makes this fight tedious, long, irritating, boring, and just downright annoying. And he goes out in the most pathetic way possible. Look, I don't care about the comic books and how they did this character, because the way they did him in the game gives me more than enough reason to not even care about him in the slightest. Why should I care what he did in the comic books if the game that I played shows him being nothing but a pathetic, wrinkled, old man? Get this stupid grandpa out of my face. Number one was a villain that I've hated for so long. A villain that I hated from one of the worst games I played. In fact, most generic games I played. And I've replayed it again to see if my opinions hold up. Commander Hask from Star Wars Battlefront 2 Remake is still my most hated character in any form of media. Nothing about him shows any good qualities in the slightest, considering the game itself had by far one of the most bare-bones stories in the entire series. The way they did Hask as the main villain was pitiful. He served alongside Inferno Squad and was part of the team entirely, only until they decided to attack a planet that was sited by the Empire for some apparent reason to bring out some new change. And Hask, being the dipshit that wants to follow orders, betrays his commanding leader and just downright betrays everyone that he was working alongside with. And you'd think that would make for an interesting character and twist. But he's not seen throughout the entire game. Yep, after that whole betrayal scene, he is not seen throughout the entire game, further proving this to be pointless. Only up until we get to the last mission of the game, where we have an actual boss fight against him, and after he's defeated, he lives. Apparently he survived the crash and is promoted admiral? What? This guy failed his job. Why does he get a promotion? He doesn't deserve one. And only until the second campaign, where he's revealed to be the actual main villain of the game, and you think with more screen time, this would make him interesting. But no, the second campaign is boring, and the way they did him was just another one of those villains who just talks and talks and talks, doesn't kill our main characters, and just disappears throughout the entire game. His whole motivation didn't even make sense in the first place, and you'd think this would be a perfect time, but no, they do nothing with him. And don't even get me started on his boss fights. His first fight is irritating and annoying to deal with, and his second fight is one of the worst final bosses I have ever seen in gaming history. I just don't know what they were doing. They brought out such a generic and uninteresting character with a plot twist that could have made sense but didn't fully get explained, an uninteresting motivation, a character that doesn't look intimidating or threatening in the slightest, and is the biggest reason why it killed Star Wars for me entirely. I already lost interest with the series considering they are butchering it nowadays, but I lost interest during my watch with Rise of Skywalker and seeing Emperor Palpatine brought back to life. But after experiencing that movie, and then experiencing this fight and this horrendous villain, this is the lowest the series has gone to, far none. And nothing is redeemable about Hask in the slightest. So get this cocksucker out of my face, and I never want to see him and his stupid face ever again. Overall, that's the list. I just can't stand these stupid, awful villains. Seriously, they should hire someone else to actually do a better job with these characters, I swear. But thankfully, the next list is going to be on villains that actually know how to get the job done. So that will be next up on my list. Thank you all for watching. What are some of your least favorite villains? I'm curious to hear what villains pissed you off or made you hate them. And yeah, until next time.